They just see it's like, oh, now I gotta pay the IVU, and I don't see anything good. What that creates is that starts normalizing. You start accepting that. It's like, yeah, this is the new norm. This is okay. Just yesterday, I was at a congressional briefing, and Ms. Carmen Villanueva, a community leader in Puerto Rico, she said, poor people in Puerto Rico don't know that they are poor. And that really clicked with me.
And don't know that they're in crisis.
And they don't know that they're in
because
crisis.
They have been in crisis for so long.
Exactly. The economic crisis for the average Puerto Rican did not start just now. Did not start with the very minute cuts to the debt that the board is recommending, and actually not recommending, but brokering and achieving. It didn't start when Alejandro Garcia Padilla said la deuda es impagable. It didn't start there. It started way before that. Actually, if you really look at it, it didn't even start with Section 936 when it expired. The economic growth has been there for a while for a sector of the population. What it's been getting is just getting a little bit bigger. The problem is, and we're talking about the contracting of the people, is for the people that are on the poverty level, they just accept it as it is. And for the people that are in the middle class, you're getting the mass immigration. If you have the means, you have American citizenship, you just pick any of the 50s and you say, you know what, I'm gonna raise my family over there because I'm gonna make more money and the schools are better and there are no jobs. That's what Edwin said this morning. The problem is jobs, jobs, jobs. So when we really, really think about the effects on the debt on the normal people, there is no catalyst. We don't have a catalyst. We have the ability, we have the means as a country, as people of the diaspora with people in the island, just one Puerto Rican nation. We have the means to be able to transmit and actually raise the alarms and push forward on some of these issues. When the Greek crisis happened, people went up on the streets. They had to shut down the banks for days because people actually saw the crisis. When Alejandro Garcia Padilla went on TV, there was no crisis. People did not react to it. When all of the issues that are happening with the debt restructuring, we still don't see the crisis. So that's my concern. My inner activist is asking, what can we do to actually put this information in front of the people and say, this is a crisis that is happening. Puerto Rico is not gonna get better. Martín has done a very good research on this, where even under the best estimates and assuming that they're right, even if the board goes away according to their plan and projections, they're just bound to come back because we're gonna be on the same hole. So this is my rhetoric. I don't have an answer. I just want more conversations on this. I'm really happy to see this room packed with people because it's a very complicated topic. The debt is not the debt, it's not just one debt, there are multiple debts and they're treated differently. And if you listen to the board, they will tell you, well, there's unsecured and yada, yada, yada. So it sounds complicated. The net effect and the things that we gotta understand is austerity is right now going to cripple the economic development from the island. Crippling the economic development means no jobs. It also means people will leave. And it also means that the people that are gonna left behind are the people that they don't have the means to pay the debt. So there won't be a huge economic boom in Puerto Rico. We need to reinvent the way that we're doing things. All the economic development that we have had over the past has been through tax incentives, and somehow we need to figure out and look at that model and ask ourselves, was that enough? Was that sustainable?
Okay. You have all changed my questions all around the three of you. Just blew them away. So, the one I'm going to start, the other day, this true story, I wanted to watch Rocket Man, and they made me watch at home Rashomon, it's a Kurosawa film where there's an incident, a crime, and there's 4 people looking at the crime from different perspectives. It's very serious and very black and white and whatever. So I think we have a Rashomon situation here with how did we get into this mess when Mesa was built, and what really happened. As I'm hearing you talk, I wonder, some of us may have been living in this cloud, or we're just we're looking at the same incidents from 4 points of view and 4 different realities like this movie. So just to go back a little, because I think we have to go back a little, the way this was sold to us was, or the way that the whole thing transpired was that Governor Alejandro Garcia Padilla said he could not pay the debt. At the time, we did not have access to the bankruptcy code because we lost it through a rewrite in 1984, I think it was. We were just left out because, of course, we don't have representation, and so they left us out. It was literally that kind of a glitch. So Garcia Padilla then tries to do una quiebra criolla law. It is appealed, and the Supreme Court rules it as unconstitutional, meaning you cannot legislate your own bankruptcy law. And so at that point, they turned to Washington and they said, please give us bankruptcy. And they started with something modest to deal with certain corporations, and then the concept took off of the super bankruptcy, in which everything would receive, the whole of Puerto Rico would be captured as part of this bankruptcy process. I think at that point, the other people started getting nervous, particularly the creditors, and that's kind of when the birth of Promesa came about, where there was this agreement between the Democrats and Republicans that we could have access to bankruptcy, well, essentially a bankruptcy court and restructuring, but not without La Junta. This was also so that at the time, with this package of growth initiatives that would be taken following on a congressional task force at the time, that did this long reports of things that had to be done in Puerto Rico to get the economy growing, which are all those things that you mentioned, Jose, that should be done, like Medicaid and HIC and all those nice things. They did a really nice report, and everybody cooperated about it, and nothing happened. And so the story, one of the storylines of what happened is that the Republicans made me do it. You know, we wanted to get this deal for Puerto Rico, but you know, we had a congressionally controlled Republican Congress, and this is what happened. So here we are, and there's another reality, which from the notes that you were saying was, no, Martín was saying, or I think are you, nobody has seen a single situation in the world where you try to grow an economy with austerity. And so is the reality another one in which this was the plan all along? And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Anybody who knows my thinking knows I'm kind of a center person. I don't go, you know, but was the thinking all along that the priority here was to pay off the creditors, and that then the chips would fall where they may. And when you're talking about this spiraling or this slow decline where we at the end are left with our service people, I mean, there was just an announcement by the government that they want to make us a yacht economy where yachts from Monaco can come, you know, and stay in Puerto Rico, and the only yacht jobs that I know are like scrubbing the yacht or cooking for the yacht. You know, it's not the kind of job you go to Mayagüez for. So when we're left with an economy where the creditors have been paid, our educated people have left, we have a service people that they have nice jobs for the kind of training they have. We still have el pan so nobody goes hungry, a little bit of cake so nobody gets too sick. A little bit plantation-like, right? So you got to protect it. And at that point, the creditors have been taken care of, but then what do you have? You have a lot of free land because people have moved away. And then you start, and for God's sake, anybody who knows me personally knows I'm not this type of code, right? Eduardo?
I don't know.
Yeah.
You're going in a direction I'm not.
And so then what we wind up is we're compared constantly to Greece, but I think of us more like Jamaica. And you know, the new Jamaica. I would like one of you to refute what I just said, but because I don't want this to be true. But would any of you care to comment?
Before we go, I think you started talking about Promesa and what the hopes of what Promesa is. One of the things that I think that we Puerto Ricans could understand is Promesa was not new. It was new to us, it was specific to us, but the concept of fiscal oversight boards are not new.
Right.
Since 2009, there have been over 100 control boards all over the US, in 13 states and Washington, D.C. So this is definitely not a new concept. So From that said, and there's no fiscal oversight board that is actually the same. There is a paper written by Dr. Marieli Santana. You should check it out. She's going to come up with a book about this. It's really, really good. But the concept of promesa was not really, it's not new.
No,
and it's always the same. It's always the same motto. They come in, they manage your budget, they take over control. In the case of Washington D.C., they just took over control of the budget, and more than budget, they took over some agencies. They could not borrow. Major Marion Barry, he actually he was saying that this was an assault on democracy. So this concept of boards, well, we are appalled because, hey, we didn't elect them. Who are these technocrats that came on board? Are not new.
But what is new is the size of the board, the debt, and how it's going to be addressed, to which these guys can talk to.
I would love to hear.
Well, yeah, I have a couple of comments. Yes, boards are not new, but boards are not even a necessary condition to resolve a fiscal crisis. So you have cases like Tampa and many others in the U.S. that resolve fiscal crisis without a fiscal board. And of course, in the case of Detroit, they have a fiscal board, but it was appointed by the governor of Michigan. That people in Detroit vote for the governor of Michigan. And so to say, there is some accountability, but these people, they have zero accountability by the people. So there are some political issues around the creation of the board. I also would like to comment that some people said that, as you mentioned, that the only solution was this super Chapter 9. And I'm not saying that's true, because right now we have this super Chapter 9, but as I said, there are many government-owned corporations, municipalities that even apply for bankruptcy. They just increase rates to issue new bond and do a private negotiation with some bondholders. And there are many other ways of resolving debt crisis. For instance, many countries around the world have resolved the crisis with rated bonds, bonds that the U.S. government says, you know, wait a minute, I'm going to guarantee this emission of new bonds. Then the interest rate of those new emissions are lower. So you pay with that new bonds, you pay that have a low interest rate. You pay your old debt that have a high interest rate. Whether or not Obama and his administration was willing to do that, that's another story. But certainly there was a window there that could have been open, as well as increasing the credit. This morning, Edwin mentioned the credit that the Treasury is giving to the excise taxes that foreign corporations are paying in Puerto Rico. We call it the Act 154 in Puerto Rico. And basically, about 11 manufacturing industries pay 4% of excise taxes on any transaction that they have with their biggest corporations here in the U.S. With the subsidiary in Puerto Rico, you have to pay 4% of excise taxes. Obama could have said, I'm going to increase that to 10% so that the government have even more revenues and can put even some conditions, and that's a way of increasing revenues and avoiding a collapse or a fiscal crisis. I think this conversation about the sense of crisis that many people don't have in Puerto Rico, I believe that the media have a lot to do with it. Because if you put Jugando Pelotadura or you open the newspaper, you're going to see that when they talk about any debt restructuring, they're saying we are saving, right? And that's what Martín was there with me about a couple of months ago, and he said all of these are lies. You know, they are talking about this negotiation in the wrong terms. And so if you put the TV and they are saying that we are saving money, say, oh, that's a good thing. People like to save money, right? They like discounts and they like to pay less for the same product. So people saying we are saving money, and that's not the conversation. The conversation is this sustainable or not? Are we going to have a fresh start or not? That's the question that we have to be reading in the media, but we are not. The media is in another direction, and that's a huge difference with the chat. If you read the media in the middle of this publication of the chat, almost all the media was against Governor Rosselló and were saying he has to resign. So that has a lot to do with why people don't have that sense of crisis, because media many times are apologetical with the debt agreements that we have in Puerto Rico. And one more thing I want to comment is that, yes, if we don't do anything, we're going to have another round of restructuring and the economy is going to collapse again. But there are many options. And if you talk to the private sector in Puerto Rico, most of them are waiting for another federal tax incentive for manufacturing. And research that I just finished with another colleague, what we found is that if you concentrate in the long term, if you concentrate your economic model in just one sector, that is not sustainable in the long term. It's better that you incentivize all the sectors and that you grow in a balanced way, not just depending on one sector. That was the case of Puerto Rico, depending on the manufacturing sector. That is half of the GDP in Puerto Rico is manufacturing. Right now in Congress, there is a project, it's called the HR 2357, that is asking to include Puerto Rico to give a waiver in the case of international cargo transfers.
The second Air Jones Act kind of thing.
Exactly. So many of you know about the Jones Act, that if a ship is coming from Brazil, goes to Puerto Rico, then cannot go to the U.S., and that is isolating Puerto Rico from the international logistics. But that does happen the same thing with the case of airplanes. So if an airplane is coming from Spain and then wants to go from Puerto Rico to the U.S., that is not possible. And that is, of course, it's a great constraint for the tourist sector in Puerto Rico. And if you go, for instance, to Panama and you go to the airport of Panama, you're going to see a lot of people there, and you see a lot of cargo, you see a lot of passengers. And many people say, well, that's because Panama is in a strategic position in the Americas. Well, Puerto Rico is also in a strategic position, but we are in the middle of this air cabotage laws. So right now, I think we need, so to say, a coalition calling Congress, say, giving this waiver to Puerto Rico doesn't cost a penny to the federal government, and it's something that can stimulate tourism, and that's things that we have to do in every sector. In the agricultural sector, we need, in the service sector, we need incentive. We cannot depend on just on one sector towards the future.
Would you like to, nobody has still answered, is this intentional or just as happens situation?
I can address that issue, but first I want to establish a distinction between promesa and the board. They came together. Those are two different things. And what is important is to have an appropriate legal framework for resolving a debt crisis. There are enormous coordination issues that arise in the context of a debt crisis. Many different creditors. There are conflicts among those creditors, and resolving a debt crisis without a proper legal framework can lead to very bad outcomes. And that's actually what we observe for sovereigns. Sovereign nations, they don't have access to a legal framework for resolving sovereign debt crisis. And more often than not, the resolution of the crisis gets delayed a lot, more than it should. The debt reduction that the countries in debt distress obtain is usually not enough, to restore that sustainability, so they have to do it again shortly afterwards. And Puerto Rico, as we know, didn't have access to a legal framework. It wasn't covered by the US bankruptcy code. So it was important to have a legal framework. Puerto Rico could not pass its own law, the Ley Criolla. But then PROMESA was enacted, but it came with the board. And the problem is that what is necessary in order to resolve the debt crisis is to have that agent that represents the interest of the debtor actually representing the interest of the debtor. And that's not happening here.
Can we clap for that?
But going back to the issue of the narratives, and I will promise to respond to the issue of Jamaica and Greece, but if I ask you, what is the level of debt that the oversight board consider as sustainable? Do you know? Does anyone know? Why not?
They have not done an analysis.
It's not in their interest to ever have it serviced.
No, but the issue is we need to compute how much debt reduction Puerto Rico needs in order to restore the
They have not done the
sustainability.
analysis, have they?
I'll tell you in a moment what they do.
Well, is the question that they're deciding how much debt there is, or how much money there's left over after the spending, and that's what debt can be?
Well, this is all interrelated, right? So the point is how much debt you can service.
Yeah.
What is the level of debt that is sustainable? That's the central question in a restructuring process. You need to have a number that it guides you, it tells you where to go. Okay? Do we know what's that number for the board? We don't. And it's not that we don't because we didn't read the plan. We don't know because they never said it. And the press, I want to see the press asking them 1,000 times, okay, what's the number? Well, how much debt reduction does Puerto Rico need? Well, the answer is will be the following. You cannot really compute that number. You have to do it, you have to look at different instruments. Fine, okay, on each instrument, how much debt reduction we need. As many times as needed in order for the oversight board to respond to the question. They don't do it. And in the plan, in the fiscal plan, what they do is something totally ambiguous. They include some charts that don't refer to Puerto Rico's actual debt payment capacity. They call it illustrative debt payment capacity, as if it was a hypothetical exercise when we are talking about an actual case in which we need actual numbers for resolving a real crisis. Okay? So then the board somehow gets away with this series of deals that Jose described, and it's very hard to discuss. We did provide a number, I did provide a number, other analysts provided a number too, but when they don't provide a number, what do you compare your number to? Right? So I think that's very important. And finally, going to the issue of Jamaica and Greece. So Puerto Rico has this peculiar political system in which it has economic consequences, because the fact that Puerto Ricans can move to the mainland, US, means that a reduction in, for instance, a minimum wage that some advocate as a way to increase competitiveness will also encourage out-migration. Okay, so and that's something in Greece we see that when incomes get reduced, even though there is some attachment to the region, people have more incentives to leave.
And it's interesting that the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation, which are the two conservative think tanks in Washington, have a two-trick pony. One is eliminate the Jones Act, which they're for, and the other one is reduce the minimum wage. That's the only that's their only two policies they have come up in like 10 years. So
yeah,
and I agree with one of those.
Yeah, me too. And we talk about that one. We just don't talk about the other one. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem is way more complex than that. And again, we need to the economy needs to resolve the deep problems. And the first one is the issue of the debt. In order to have a more vibrant economy, it's necessary to have more investments in what the economy needs, including, as I defined before, human capital, right? Education. And there is evidence that shows that countries that have prolonged crisis, or in general economies that suffer prolonged crisis, suffer from a problem that we economists call hysteresis. Hysteresis. It has long-term consequences. Something that happens in the short term has long-term consequences. Basically, kids growing up in more unstable environments, they develop less capacities for learning and for interacting socially. There's more social violence, etc. And all those effects mean that the economy has less capacity to develop, to grow. So in that sense, I would say that it's not just an issue of goal of conversion towards a service-based economy with low-skilled workers as the main part of the demographic structure, but also the fact that there is an entire generation that is deprived of opportunities. Even if they leave sometimes, but especially if they stay, and that has long-term consequences on the identity of the society. I mean, and there is plenty of evidence that shows that these effects happen. What it means for health, for education, for the family in general.
It's a form of trauma.
Yes. So so you see what I mean. There are elements of both.
Right. So are we Jamaica or are we Greece?
That's what I mean is that there are elements of both, and the political status of Puerto Rico implies that there are also elements that the Greek economy also has.
We're hybrid. You both mentioned that we don't have. You mentioned that we don't have an agent that represents the interests of the people. And the agent in this case would be the government of Puerto Rico, which has taken certain moves, which makes you wonder, why have they not objected more forcefully? Why did they not object to the Cofina deal? Why are they trying to get through the Prepa deal, deals that are notoriously bad? And you also brought the issue of, well, no, maybe you did not bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up, the issue of corruption. Now, we know for a fact that in the previous the previous governor did go to Wall Street to accept campaign contributions. How does this compromise the process? Not only in terms of the decisions that are taken by government, I'm trying to figure out where are the conflicts of interest. I'm not going to talk about La Junta, just the government. Where are the conflicts of interest in our government? How did they come about? Is it because there are relationships with Wall Street? Is it something else? I mean, something is broken and we're not sure how. Can you elaborate?
You want to go first?
Well, I would say that the conflict of interest was clear when Governor Rosselló removed this commission that was in charge of auditing the debt.
Which Garcia Padilla did not do much with either, so
Yeah.
we're not going to excuse anybody here.
Yeah, exactly. But at least it was working in some sense, and they have it was a law that was enacted. So one of the issues was that at the same time that this commission was starting to work, at the same time you have this candidate that was here saying in Wall Street, don't worry about it, debt is payable. We just have to fix the government, debt is payable. And one of the first things he did, and I believe that was a direct consequence of those conflict of interest, was to say, you know what, this is the end to this commission. Because the official argument was that $5 million, that's a truck of money, you know. McKinsey takes $3 million every month on doing very bad fiscal plans. The first fiscal plan even used the GDP, and we don't use the GDP to model the Puerto Rico economy. We learned that in Econ 101 in Puerto Rico. So charge $3 million every month. With 2 months, you can pay this commission, and the job is far more important. So I think there is a lot of conflict of interest. My colleagues, for instance, economists that you read everywhere and you see them talking everywhere, many of them have conflict of interest as well, and they don't say it. So one of the things I did when I was the president of the Puerto Rico Association of Economists is to create a code of ethics saying, you know, you have you have the right of free speech, and you can say whatever you want. But if somebody is paying your study, you have to disclose. Yeah, make some disclosures. Just for transparency.
Thank you.
And that's something that other professions have to do as well, I believe.
You want to say something?
I mean, what I can say is that what I observe is that no one has been representing the interests of the debtor. I don't know what's behind that. I don't know the relationships between the different actors, but that's been happening, and you refer to the government, the previous government, right? Ricardo
Yeah,
Rosselló.
they would go and ask for campaign donations in Wall
Yeah.
Street, and so,
Well,
something has to give.
That's a clear conflict of interest, but what we've seen is that in the public debate, they were saying the same arguments that the board and the bondholders also on this point, because this is a good deal for the bondholders. They were just repeating the same arguments that the others were making. One is the issue of the savings that we've been discussing here, how much savings is that it entails. It was interesting, there was a part in this famous chat about that, I don't know if you saw it. I gave a press conference in San Juan, and it was in the cover of a Nuevo Dia, and it was saying this is not really what that deal means. There are not the savings that they are selling. And the point was how to create a counter narrative. And then someone is reading my arguments and says, but this person is saying that the discount rates, the details there. And I don't remember the name of Sobrino, I think it was, says, let's not discuss that, because if we get into that, we lose. Okay, so there is not really a discussion on the debtor side, what the net debtor means. And I think that's very important when you need to, and again, I've been in many of these processes. I've never seen a debt crisis resolved in which there is no proper representation of the interests of the debtor. You need to have someone that is actually representing those interests. Well, that's what we haven't seen here.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I don't think I have the facts to be able to say there's a clear conflict of interest, but I completely agree with you. There's just no representation, and I think it goes, and you can see it in many ways. There's the really the lack of commitment to public service that we have seen through the administrations, that it just extends far beyond. When we look at certain events, the last Promesa hearing, Governor Rosselló was presenting, and he did not even submit his report on time. The Congress was receiving the report as he was about to speak, and the congressman from the Republican side said, we should adjourn, because I just got the report and we have to evaluate it. It is that kind of commitment. This gentleman is there representing Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican interests, and should be there and be prepared to discuss it and make sure that he could advocate for Puerto Rico from front and center. And even on basic stuff, things were not moving. Of course, on the board side, there were things that they should have pushed back. And it's not only Governor Rosselló. I mean, it goes even on the legislature. When the last bill passed, it passed very late in the day. I don't know if you guys saw it on the news. And I remember Manuel Natal, trying to shout, I got some questions, and he was completely ignored. Granted, they ignore him all the time. But that's not the point. The point is there was very little debate, and there was lack of commitment. So it's really,
It was done in the middle of the night.
and there's lack of commitment, and it's not just from the executive branch. It's actually a widespread commitment on trying to understand. I mean, we keep going back as to why this happens, and one is, probably they don't understand the severity of what was going on. Probably they were told by the aides or whoever was creating a conflict of interest, hey, I just need to vote yes on this and that's it and be quiet. That's a possibility. I don't know for a fact. But I think that they just really don't understand what's really best for Puerto Rico right now. And I think that that's really continues to be our role to really stand up and say, this is actually a big crisis. This is a big deal. We all need to push forward for better reforms, especially on the debt. And unfortunately, some of the reforms are supposed to be done and done. I don't know that they are. I think that they can be revisited. Promesa does have the capacity to give the board the chance to reopen.
We're going to get to that question later, because we want to talk, but I want to get a really clear understanding of what's going on, and that's the most important question here. Just to kind of move the little data on costs that we're saying, the consultants and so forth. I read this recently. In Detroit, roughly 175 million were spent to restructure a debt of 20 billion in 17 months. It is estimated that in Puerto Rico, the restructuring process would surpass 1.4 billion and take a minimum of 6 to 10 years. I don't know if this is true or not, but that's something that's out there, okay? So, there's, Elizabeth Warren wants to cancel the debt, and Bernie Sanders wants to cancel the debt. There's a lot of cancel the debt talk and the progressive side, okay? And often you hear about Haiti, and Haiti had its debt canceled before and after the earthquake. But Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. But Haiti's debt was, before the earthquake, 1.2 billion, after the earthquake, 1.2 billion, so it's more easily to absorb. What political, because it is a political process, or what political economic conditions would have to exist for there to be the political will to cancel the debt? Because I just don't see it. We're not Haiti, and we're not at that stage. So when we're told by candidates, and I'm not opposed to endorsing any candidates, by the way, but when we're told that we're going to cancel the debt, I personally don't see the political to do that. What conditions would have to exist for that to happen?
I have a question. When you say cancel the debt, what does that mean? Who gets the loss? Is it absorbed by the bondholder?
That's the other
Is
thing,
it paid by the U.S.?
Because in Haiti, it was absorbed by the donor community. It's an international monetary fund. It's an international lending institution. So that when when you cancel a debt, it's not like I cannot olvidar. Somebody has to absorb it. Okay. So it's either going to be the creditors or the American government. So why are we talking about the canceling the debt if this is not a reality, or is it a reality?
Well, it's interesting that when Donald Trump went to Puerto Rico, he said that you can say bye-bye to that debt. I don't know if it's Goldman Sachs. I don't know who owns that debt, but you can say goodbye to that debt.
And he did say it.
Yeah, he said that. So
before or after the paper towels?
After.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing. He did say it.
So you can say that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump have agreed something, and it's in that particular area. Sorry to get in the middle, but I have to move a little bit here. So definitely, I think that was the moment of creating the political conditions to ask for the write-off of the bonds of Puerto Rico, but that didn't happen. As I said, and Martín also said, Hurricane Maria actually worked as a bailout to bondholders, because we were better off with the pre-Maria fiscal plan than with the post-Maria fiscal plan. So there is a lot of poor households that are worse off after Hurricane Maria because they don't get enough money. Some of them get zero funds to reconstruct their houses, but bondholders get the double, actually, when you compare fiscal plan pre-Maria with fiscal plan post-Maria. So instead of going the direction of Haiti, saying, we need it, if we are not going to write off this debt, at least we need an even larger haircut. We went just to the opposite direction, and I think that's something very, very unfortunate, especially for the vulnerable population in Puerto Rico.
I don't think the debt's going to be canceled. I don't think that's realistic. But it has to be restructured before the court of law to an extent in which debt sustainability is restored. So what it takes is political will. And in this context, we go back to a point that we made before. The actions of the actors involved with political power are not aligned with the needs of Puerto Rico. And in the sense, the most important change should happen within Puerto Rico. I mean, someone has to defend Puerto Rico in Puerto Rico, and it has to be the government of Puerto Rico. And of course, changes in Congress will also help, could help. Right? So that will also affect the composition of the oversight board and could turn the balance.
And they have just been approved for another 3 year or till September? I can't remember. Till September, right? And they have to be.
Well, there's a case pending before the Supreme Court
Right.
of the United States.
Right.
Oral hearing is on October 15th on the constitutionality of the appointments to the board. I mean, whether the appointments clause of the U.S. Constitution applies to Puerto Rico or not. I mean, that's the big question.
So we might be looking at that this fall too.
Yep.
Richard, like you said,
Good point.
Ok, después sí. Okay. William, Reverendo José. Soy oportunista.
Ay, reverendo, si me dejas terminar las preguntitas tempranito, se lo abro, porque es que estoy tratando de cubrir material que creo que acapara a todo el mundo. So I have 2 more questions that I'm opening to the public. I'm so sorry. Because these are, I try to do these. ¿Cómo, perdón?
Debt cancellation.
You want to say something?
Yeah.
And then
So-
I have to do, and then we'll open.
Yeah, I asked a question about cancellation of debt for 2 primary reasons. Say, somebody needs to absorb the loss. If you ask the bondholders to absorb the loss, we already know what that's going to happen on future debt acquisition. Unless we have other mechanisms, say the U.S. Government guaranteeing those debt, it's just going to skyrocket the price of future borrowing. So we got to really measure that and do the financial analysis of whether that's actually better for Puerto Rico or worse. Because what if we can actually say we forget this debt, but then in the future you just can't borrow. It's just way too expensive for you to do anything. And then you're stuck in that model. So it's something that has to be looked at. If we're looking about, like you said, political candidates saying, oh, we're going to cancel the debt, we're just going to absorb it, the U.S. government paid for it. We got to understand the political climate that we're in and we have been in. When PROMESA was enacted, one of the things that are key differences between the board of Puerto Rico versus other boards is that the board of Puerto Rico is paid by Puerto Ricans. That was as a direct result of the current context of how when PROMESA was enacted. The current administration did not want to pass anything that even resembled a bailout, because they were just coming out from the bailouts, and as of back then, bailouts were seen as a bad thing. You know, the people of Wall Street won, the people of Main Street lost. So that's why the government made no commitment. As of right now, we have like Medicaid crisis coming up, and that's money. And that's still something that at the end of the month, if there's no new law, there's no funding for Medicaid for Puerto Rico. So can we think that they will approve Medicaid and also say, oh, in addition, here's an additional check to absorb the debt? It's very unlikely. I mean, there has to be like drastic changes in the political landscape for that to really be absorbed. I don't think that there's any political capital or will right now to be able to do that.
And we should be aware of these things as we head into election years. We're going to be told a lot of things in 2020 from lots of really good people, and but we have to, you know, be intelligent about what we hear.
PROMESA was enacted before.
Excuse me?
When was PROMESA signed?
2016.
Before the
June
election.
2016.
Before the election.
Yeah.
Yes, it was under Obama.
Yeah, it was under Obama. We're going to go to my last question because I want to open it for people. But before I make the last question, I just want to make a tour. I wanted to talk about something else, but we're not going to have time. This whole notion, we were listening this week in Washington to la graduada, la de Eva Prado. Auditoría ya. You know, the audit, the fact that, yeah, we talked about that. I would like the conversation to continue after this panel is over because we're not going to have time here about, you know, there is a messaging issue. You know, how do you make that, you know, people ran to the streets for Rico renuncia. They got that one, but they're not running to the street for la auditoría or for the debt. And this is something that people should be on the street for. And I don't know if there's an estimate of how much we're going to save by doing auditoría, but finding out the legal debt. But I know for a fact that it has got, even if we were to say we didn't find anything, everything was hunky-dory, it will have the effect of accountability. People will have certain lives of what was done, what happened. We had truth commissions in parts of the world, like in South Africa, places where horrible things have happened. And truth commissions are not just finding about finger pointing, it's also about just finding out the truth. And I think that is important. So I want you to take that conversation and have it elsewhere after here. This is the very big question that we have to, and you better answer well.
No pressure.
Sorry, my computer freezes up because there's so many interesting things
That
here.
was said by a Puerto Rican, right?
Woman. Okay. Where is it? I'm going to read it. The COFINA and PREPA agreements are punitive deals. I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it just so people know. Can the COFINA deal be overturned? What actions can ordinary citizens take to reject the PREPA deal or any other bad deals? There are legal actions that can be taken, both by agents of government and by private citizens. Not just protesting, but part of protesting is part. I would like you to go into the bowels of this. Either.
Well, he's the expert. I just want to say a small comment before that is that one of the narratives that I read a lot and I heard a lot in the media, especially in Puerto Rico, is that we can't go too far with haircuts because that is going to raise interest rate in the future because creditors are going to remember what happened with when they
back to the markets.
when they lend money to the government of Puerto Rico, and I think that's against what I learned in finance class, right? The investor takes decision forward-looking, not backward-looking, and that's what they teach actually, and this is not Marxist theories. This is the neoclassical, the neoliberal finance investment theory says that when you going to make an investment decision, you are making that decision forward-looking. So what we have to make sure is that the fundamentals of our economy towards the futures are looking good and not try to be very nice with the haircut of bondholders. Yeah.
Okay. So there are legal actions that people like us can take, correct?
I don't have an answer, unfortunately, to that one.
Okay, let me throw this out here then. I understand, for instance, the legislature has to approve the plans of adjustment, correct? Correct?
Yeah, the judge has to approve.
No, the Puerto Rican legislature has to approve the plans, correct?
No. Puerto Rican legislature is another picture. The board basically controls everything. There are hardly any causes of action. There are hardly any private causes of action for folks to challenge in a court of law the actions of the board. I mean, Congress shut down that possibility.
But for instance, let me ask you something. This is not my territory, it's a real question. The PREPA deal was just coming out. For that PREPA deal, for that PREPA agreement to happen, certain changes have to happen, laws have to pass in the legislature. Isn't the Puerto Rican legislature one of the points where we could stop this action?
Very limited. I mean, the only thing that
they had to prove COFINA.
Well, the only thing with the PREPA deal is that the PREPA deal is premised on issuing new debt, right, at a higher rating, right, in light of the deal.
Right.
If that's the case, some legal scholars argue that the Puerto Rico legislature then has a role to play, but that's not really, there's no consensus on whether the Puerto Rico legislature really has any authority to go over the deal. I mean, to revisit the deal, I mean, that's something that, I mean, there's no, in my estimation.
I understand we can't revisit the deals, that I know, but I felt a lot of people asked that question, can we overturn it? That's why I had to ask it.
And very quickly, I mean, there's an outstanding legal question that has to be answered, whether the board could actually bypass the Puerto Rico legislature and authorize debt issuance on its own without the Puerto Rico legislature. That's a possibility, and that hasn't happened yet, but that's something that could happen and could end up in court as well.
Okay, so you're not part of our panel, so.
Send you my input.
Yeah, but it's
It's a legal question.
So it is not clear that the citizenry can put pressure on the legislature to not pass a deal when it finds it punitive. Is that what you're saying?
All roads lead to Congress.
No, I'm talking the Puerto Rican legislature.
They approve the
Forget,
deals.
right now, forget the Puerto Rico
Okay,
legislature.
so that answers that question. My other question is.
I disagree. I think that's wrong. I just looked it up. I think they approved the COFINA deal.
Who approved the COFINA deal?
The legislature.
The Puerto
Yeah,
Rico
but the
legislature.
difference is that COFINA has government revenue.
It's a bond
sales tax,
revenue deal.
versus electricity rates of a public corporation that is, to some extent, independent.
No, it's a public. It's part of the government also.
It's created by a public law. Created by the government.
The COFINA.
Well, that's a good case then to the court to interpret.
I don't want to intervene. I know we have little time, but the COFINA deal, basically, as Mario suggests, is about revenue bonds. So obviously, raising sales tax, right, to basically pay up the COFINA bonds, that means that the Puerto Rico legislature, pursuant to our own constitution, must be involved. Now, the PREPA deal is something different, right? And if the Puerto Rico legislature really wants to somehow help in the process, they should press Congress, because again, everything that these guys have been saying here basically goes to show that Puerto Rico is a colony, and colonies have no authority because Congress is acting pursuant to its plenary authority under the territory clause of the Constitution. If we want to change that, we need to go to Congress.
I want to answer Gretchen's question, do the legislature approve the deal?
You say no? Okay, I have to gain control. By the way, our new panelist is Rafael Coxaloma. He's a legal professor.
At DC University, right?
Yeah,
But yeah, I would like to say something because I remember the judge that was in charge of restructuring the debt in Detroit. He said that
they went to protest, the people protested,
Yeah.
and in Detroit, the judge said, we're gonna take this back and look at it again, because people were up in arms.
exactly. He said
And they were up in arms with us.
he said that they have a lot of pressure in the debt restructuring. So if people wants to do something, then you have to go back to the streets with cacerolas, with Martín,
But
with all
I am
that kind of
asking
things.
you, there has to be something. Now, there's another question I have, and I don't have the answer, so I'm throwing out here, is my understanding is that if you're if the government owes you debt in any way, a pension, un recibo de algo that they didn't pay you, anything that they owe you as a citizen, that you will have the ability to vote in the adjustment plan. They're done in classes, the creditors classes, and that you will have the ability to vote in one of those classes, whatever you're set for, and that as such, you could somehow impede passage of the deal if you don't think the deal is beneficial.
Well,
I'm not looking at you because you're the lawyer here.
well, holdouts.
No, there is another professor.
Yeah, I mean,
right there.
Professor Efren Ramos, a great colleague. I mean, but holdouts have very little power. I mean, and you know, most of the deals you have some holdouts, but still the deals go on because most bondholders, most institutional bondholders are supporting the deal, and therefore they can move forward, right?
But but I understand though that it's not, people have this idea that it's just the big creditors that have the swaying power, but that there are actually lots of people with tiny bits of, that are owed to, that could have swaying power.
It's not one person, one vote. It's $1, one vote. You have more money in the bond, you have greater voting power.
Okay, so my wrap-up question is what is it that I don't live down there, I'll help from up here, but if I was living down there, what is it that I can do other than going on the street? I mean, there has to be some type of other option. There isn't?
Right down there.
Okay, we
Why
leave it
does it
at
have
that. I'll open it to questions now. That was
Well,
not.
there are many, right, that if the Supreme Court, and
It's not
that,
satisfactory what you guys are talking, but go ahead. It's so disappointing.
and that's something that our fourth panelists can explain, but if the Supreme Court overruled the decisions made by the previous board, maybe they have to start all over again. And that's a possibility.
And also maybe protesting is the option. Instead of saying, why don't we have an option other than, maybe we should recognize this is the only option we have.
Maybe this is it. So I want to open it first with Reverendo, who was so patient, I'm so sorry. And then you, sir.
Yeah, I want to respond.
If you want to
also
identify,
quickly.
you don't have to identify, some people like to identify themselves, you can, but if you want to be anonymous, that's fine too.
Reverendo William Rosa, the Help Save Puerto Rico initiative.
Oh, yes.
We're in this for the long haul. Okay. So I want to respond to the question posed by Eduardo Conde. How do we get the public, the Puerto Ricans involved in situations like this? And why isn't that being done the way it should be done? Okay. So the Puerto Ricans were very resilient, very smart, etc. But what we're lacking is lack of leadership. Okay. You take a look at what happened with the refugees that were in these hotels. The only time that we heard from our Puerto Rican leadership was whenever they were going to threaten to throw these people out. Before that, they remained quiet. Martín Guzmán hit the nail on the head and still hit it on the head. This is a political situation. It's not going to be resolved by mechanisms of charts or structures or anything like that. It's a political process, and Congress is the one that we have to hit. The problem is that we're not going to see a political will of Congress unless we made this into an American problem, a Latino problem, where we have the American public sentiment and interest and opinion behind us. Because Congress is not going to move because we want them to move. We have to make this into a political issue. If you study and look at all what happened in the 60s, African Americans, Native Americans, Chicanos, etc., they galvanized the entire country behind them on a just cause. And we have a just cause. The other thing that we're lacking is the moral leadership. Las iglesias conservadoras, evangélicas, pentecostales, they're quiet, puertorriqueñas. They're busy right now, I can name them right now, they're busy sending love letters to Trump, but he's violating the immigration laws, and he's violating what we're doing, and so we need to put a little bit of fire in there and tell them to do God's work. We need moral leadership. The other thing, the other thing that is that if we just bog down and divide ourselves over whether we're going to be independent or whether we're going to be stable, we're not going to go anywhere. We have to find consensus. Regardless of what decision is made, which, by the way, is not in our hands, we have a 800-pound gorilla, and that is that the United States is treating Puerto Rico like crap. Okay? So we need to do something about that. Thank you.
Yeah, Jaime Torres from Latinos for Healthcare Quality, and I knew a little bit about this. I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was this bad. My question is as to I know the political aspect. In terms of the legal aspect, where does Judge Taylor Swain fit in all these? Is she the final arbiter, or where are we with her decision making in relation to Promesa? And that includes Rafael. You can add your 2 cents if you want.
Basically, she was elected by Chief Justice Roberts as the judge to basically spearhead the Puerto Rico restructuring. Her decisions can be appealed to the First Circuit in Boston and from the First Circuit to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's precisely what's going on right now with the appointments clause case. So she basically found for the board in this case, right? She says that the appointment of the board members was constitutional. The First Circuit reversed her, and now basically the board is appealing to the Supreme Court. So that's how it works.
That's the nice lady over there.
This is a really simplistic question in the fact that I don't understand economics, but conceptually it seems to me that there's a relationship that if I could understand it, would help better motivate political actions. That's where this is coming from. And the conceptual relationship that I'm looking for is a relationship between how much can you forgive the debt, or how much can you say Puerto Rico can pay, and how much can the creditors make profit. And those are the two balances. And so I haven't seen literature that talks to that balance, and that's what I'm interested in.
Okay, so this is a distributive conflict, right? If you save more, so if there is more debt reduction, bondholders get less. The point is that this sounds very technical, but we call some situations, we call them zero-sum games. Whatever I lose, you win. Whatever you lose, I win. This is different because if there is more austerity on the country, it doesn't only mean that bondholders get more. It means also that the economic activity in the country falls, so the size of the pie that gets to be distributed among everyone, the bondholders and the debtor, the citizens of Puerto Rico, gets smaller, and that's what's happening now. So that's why I think it's very difficult to make such a mapping. But still, I mean, there is a point here that has to be explained very well, which is that more debt reduction affect the future, more or less debt reduction affect the future of many, many people. And there are numbers in terms of how much the bondholders have won or lost based on when they bought the bonds and what kind of deal is achieved. So those numbers can be very well explained, and I think they can help to have a more clear view of the implications of these debt deals, in the sense that there are big winners. There were people that bought bonds right after the hurricane, especially to local bondholders that needed the cash. They pay very cheap. The local bondholders were desperate because they didn't have cash after the hurricane. I mean, they had some needs right after the hurricane, and they sold. And those who bought end up making enormous profits, as Jose described. And I think that kind of image can be transmitted, and it can help the public debate.
Okay, I'm going to take one last question before I wrap up, unless, I don't know how we do that. Yeah, we're like 10 minutes past, so please.
I'll be right quick. First of all, I'm kind of excited of being here in Sierra. It's nice to see you, and I know that you guys been to Washington, D.C. And I want to say that everyone here, that I'm so proud of us being together, because I go around to different places about my concerns of Puerto Rico. Yo soy de Guayama. And when I see more Puerto Ricans coming here, and I'm so proud of you, and we got to keep it up and don't stop. But one of the things I like to suggest when going to this point, maybe at the end, and I think one of the suggestions that we should do is the perspective. For example, I went to Washington, D.C. Wednesday, because you could ask, what can I do? What can I do? But we come from different perspectives. We have professors, we have people at different levels. And for that reason, we can have type of education to communicate, the community. So when I went to Washington, D.C., and it was a wonderful experience this Friday, and I was communicating to the office of Ms. Velasquez, our congressman, Puerto Rican, and it was very interesting women, Omar, and this is the woman from that, anybody knows her name? I'm gonna have a look. Anyway, we're trying to speak to a representative. As the gentleman mentioned, we need to go to Washington, D.C. and find a way and have a plan. When you were looking at this brochure, you would see that it's a date to Washington, D.C. in October. See what page, right here. And if we find a way to find techniques to bring an action and involvement in our community, and of course I have a question, I don't know if it could be answered. How can we help to the Puerto Ricans and Puerto Ricans when they should see the representatives? Because what is the position there? Because I would like to know, if I move to Puerto Rico and do some action, how can I speak to my representatives in Puerto Rico, so de Guayama, what changes can we make? So in other words, when we look at the Puerto Ricans, we have to understand we have Puerto Ricans who are Puerto Ricans, and there's Puerto Ricans in New York who never been to Puerto Rico. I'm in the middle, I'm like this. And one of the best emotions in my life, the best moments in my life in Puerto Rico, we have to put like in a note or some recommendations today in terms of what could be done of the education, in terms of us coming together in the different levels, the people that are in the street or they're working hard, whatever, we need to educate. We need to educate at the Puerto Rican parades, for example. That's another subject, because they have that everywhere. So these are suggestions that we could come to do that. I think also, getting close to the conclusion, is that when we have these different interests and reasons, I had to laugh, in conclusion, that when I was seeing to one of the representatives, they were asking, we have to educate, especially when coming to the American representatives, and we have to let them know how we feel. And one of the things I said to them, I almost laughed, I said, the bottom line, this was illegal. It was illegal what was done. And of course, different countries, Chicago is having this debt. So in other words, in conclusions, I'm very proud that we're here together, talk to the power. We are the leaders. We have to Puerto Rico to stand there where people will be very proud of us. I'm proud of everybody's here. So let's do action.
Okay, on November 15th and 16th at the Washington, D.C. Diaspora Summit is something that we work down there. And so when we start putting information, we hope you can all come. Okay? Thank you, and thanks for your patience.
No, Lorena, amiga que trabaja en el Samsung.
Pretty good swing.